Thank y'all for having me. The introduction certainly stimulates some thoughts. I'm always a little sensitive to being called the senior senator because it so easily comes out senior citizen. A little sensitive on that. Secondly, I wasn't a surgeon, I was a gastroenterologist. And I did something different with these gloves. And there was a definite reason why I wore this. In fact, during the campaign, my laugh line was that gastroenterology has prepared me very well for Washington, D.C., I could go a little further, but we're being broadcast. If you're under 50, you don't get that joke, but just you wait. And it's wonderful to see, there's so many of you in this room who have been so meaningful to my life and to my experience. I look at the Wiles. When Felix was president, he made illiteracy or literacy his signature issue. As was mentioned, my wife and I are working on dyslexia, which is the principal cause of illiteracy in our nation. At the time, I wasn't aware of that. But now I am, and I think of that good mission, which is furthered by these books being contributed. And Felix, 10 years later, I thank you. Robert Levy and I got inducted on the same day. I always wondered if we're kind of related by marriage because my wife's ancestor was a prominent Levy in New Orleans. That was long ago when her family had money. It was gone by the time we married. But that's it. So Robert, wherever you are, man, good to see you, and good to see you've got, perfect attendance because unfortunately I don't. And I thank you all. Washington is a rockin' and rollin' place. Every morning you wake up, Tom Cotton wakes up and just checks to see what the president's latest tweet has been. Because the latest tweet may be that headline. I get distracted by tweets, and so I just kind of put my blinders on and I focus. And so what I thought I'd talk about today is kind of the agenda that we have, the president's agenda, which I personally, those parts I'm helping to advance, and then some of the things I've done on my own. As a former Rotarian, I know that 1 o'clock is a hard stop, and so I will obey that as well. When President Trump got elected, think about it. He got elected as a blue-collar candidate. And folks who had voted for Bill Clinton did not vote for Hillary Clinton. They voted for Donald Trump. Why? Both appealed to that kitchen table experience of a blue-collar family who in the previous 4 to 8 years felt like Washington had not paid attention to their needs. And if you look at what won for President Trump, it was that. Speaking to those folks. If you can boil it down to economic advancement. If you are an American who doesn't have a college degree, the last 8 years have been pretty tough. Healthcare, where the president said that President Trump, as candidate Trump, said he wanted to continue the coverage of Obamacare, but get rid of the individual and employer mandates, lower premiums, while still caring for the uninsured. And lastly, immigration, which has been perceived by many as being a threat to their job. And that's where the president has spoken. So let me speak to that as well as work in some of the stuff that I've done as well. And as I mix in what I've done as well, I thought I would speak about that which I've accomplished, that which is on the burner, and that which is pending. And then we'll go from there. First, a little bit about what I've done, because you've given me the honor to be your senator. So I probably should tell you what I've been doing. This morning I spoke to a mental health conference, a bunch of law enforcement officers, about mental health. And I was so pleased with Chris Murphy, a Democratic senator from Connecticut, to put in the Mental Health Bill of 2016, which has now been passed. And as I told the group this morning, people in Louisiana influenced that policy, which in turn has influenced our nation's policy. Greg Champagne, the sheriff of St. Charles Parish, was the one that said, the number one treater of mental health in any community is your parish jail. That is tragic. It was Jan Kosaski, who I think used to be part of this group, who told me, wait a second, the problem is that if my psychiatrist sees a patient and sees that they have out of control blood pressure, she can't refer the patient to the family practitioner because Medicaid will not pay the family practitioner. She has to send the patient to the emergency room. Isn't that more expensive? But then you speak to the family practitioner. If he sees that the hypertensive is psychotic, he cannot refer to the psychiatrist down the hall. He must send to the emergency room. I'm seeing Jamie Rock, who used to work with Jan Kosowski. This is what I learned. This and many other things, Chris and I put into a package which was called the most significant reform of mental health in the last 30 years. Come on, water, please. A tremendous bill. And our goal is to put the resources out here so that when a law enforcement officer picks up somebody for, say, public indecency because they're urinating on the side of a wall, the officer can say, wait a second, this person is not normal. This person has a mental illness. Maybe we should take this person to be treated as opposed to locking them up. Our goal is that when that young woman or young man has their first psychotic episode, when they're 22 years old, it is their last psychotic episode, because everything they need to wrap around them to return them to wholeness is available for the community to wrap around. That is our goal. And as opposed to her marriage breaking up, losing her job, being incarcerated, perhaps homeless, dying at an early age, instead she, as she returns to wholeness, lives to be 50, 60, 70, and looks back upon that one episode as a distant memory, but not as a life-defining event. We hope we can do it, and that is our goal. That's what among the things we've already accomplished. Secondly, for some of you, President Trump's agenda in order to expand economic opportunity for folks has been, one, regulatory reform. And so the Obama administration in the last 6 months put out a bunch of regulations, which were estimated to have cost business $69 billion in compliance cost. Now, $69 billion that would either incentivize businesses to move overseas, should they have that ability, or $69 billion that would be distracted from job creation and higher wages. If there was a cost-benefit ratio that was favorable, the regulations kept. But if there's one which seems to be a lot more cost for the benefit, that was the one we went after. One that I was happy to sponsor is called the Volks Rule. Volks is a company out of Prairieville, and they were compliant with the law as regards how they were keeping their records for Department of Labor. Department of Labor told them to keep them longer. They sued and said, we don't have to, we're compliant with the law. The court agreed with Volks, in which case the Department of Labor put out a new regulation. And kind of saying, the heck with Congress and your laws, we're going to regulate otherwise. And this was the one that I had the privilege of being able to sponsor and to get repealed. But in total, the regulations we did repeal that the president signed off on save business their $69 billion in compliance cost, therefore hopefully money that will go towards job creation. Now let's go to the other parts of the president's agenda. How do we create a better job, better benefits, better wages for working families? If you look at folks who are non-college educated, they are typically employed in mining, manufacturing, and construction. You can look at it. He has just tried to take the shackles off of our ability to export natural gas, as one example. Article in the Wall Street Journal 3 or 4 days ago, Henry Hub now defines the international price for natural gas. That is huge. It isn't Qatar, Australia, or the Soviet Union, Russia. It is Henry Hub. Which means when you go to North Louisiana and you stop in some small town, they're starting to reopen some of those wells that have been shuttered in the Haynesville. Those are jobs for blue-collar folks. And those are jobs that are well-paying with good benefits. Construction, Gavin's up here. I think Gavin would tell you that if he has a skilled trade worker, that skilled trade worker with benefits does quite well. And that is the goal. So when the president speaks of construction, we know that it's tied in with manufacturing. Look at all the construction work taken in Southwest Louisiana and in the river parishes. That is manufacturing leading to construction, which leads to more manufacturing jobs. But it is also the infrastructure bill. The president wants to have a $1 trillion infrastructure bill. Now, when the president says a huge, huge number, I'm not sure he means one with all those zeros, but he does mean a huge, huge number. Now, we are going to, as a country, hopefully have something that can be agreed upon on a bipartisan basis to begin upgrading our infrastructure. I was on the phone call with Mitch Landrieu yesterday. As you might guess, he's got a little infrastructure that he would like to see included in that list. Anybody in Lafayette driving to Florida on a Friday afternoon has a little bit of infrastructure they would like to have on that list. And we can go down the list of pent-up need for infrastructure development in our country, and we can say that is going to be a good strategy. The challenge for us is how do we put up the state share? Because most likely a state share will be required. Sean Wilson, director of DOTD, tells me right now we barely scrape enough for the federal highway money we're currently getting. But that is a challenge for our state legislature representing us here in the state. What else can I say? Manufacturing, again, the president wants to return manufacturing to our country. I think part of that would be regulatory reform. Part of it would be a better infrastructure. But he will also have other policies, for example, corporate tax reform that will attempt to do that as well. Corporate tax reform will be up in the fall. I'm on the Finance Committee. I'm the third Louisianian to be on the Finance Committee. Got a letter saying that it was Russell Long, John Breaux, now me. I'm very pleased about that. Someone asked me if I was the next Russell Long. And I said, you know, Russell Long was there for about 40 years before Russell Long was Russell Long. And I think folks kind of get that. But it is my intent to know as much as I can, to work as hard as I can, to influence that Finance Committee for the betterment of our country and the betterment of those families. If we can do that, I'll do my job on the Finance Committee. It also has jurisdiction over healthcare, and that will lead to one of our next topics, but obviously that is something that I am passionate about as a physician. And then lastly, the president speaks about immigration, and I can say that he's already had a significant impact upon illegal immigration. If you look at the number of crossings coming across the border, they are down maybe tenfold. I may not have that exactly right, but down about tenfold of folks who are coming across the border illegally. Now, whatever your feeling is about immigration, I think we can all agree that we don't want it to be illegal, we want it to be legal. And there can already be seen an impact on that. The president obviously is very concerned about that issue, and there's going to be differences of opinions how we approach it. But I think the idea that he wants to go to, if we're going to allow legal immigration, we should preferentially make it for the entrepreneur, the person with capital, or the engineer, doctor, you name it, who brings skill or the ability to create jobs for our fellow Americans, as opposed to somebody who is unskilled and statistically may be more likely to go into public assistance. That would be better for the Americans who are here. And the proposal he has up so far is tilted in that direction. And I personally think that is a wise immigration policy. It is what is pursued, for example, by Australia and Canada. And I think that would put us in line with them. What about issues that are on the burner? Healthcare. Again, worked at OK Loan for 25 years, and my wife was in private practice. I am passionate about trying to do something on healthcare. When the president ran, he said again he wanted to continue the coverage under Obamacare, take care of those with pre-existing conditions, eliminate the individual employer mandate, lower premiums. The Senate failed to repeal Obamacare in August, when John McCain, coming back with his brain tumor, quite dramatically walked on the floor at 1 in the morning, held his hand like a Roman emperor, but instead of going up, went down, signaling death to that effort. And most folks said, well, it's over with. I've been working on this issue for 8 years. And when I started working on it 8 years ago, folks said, well, Obamacare just passed. Why are you working on it? I said, because having worked in Louisiana's charity hospital system, I don't think this system is sustainable. But we want to start working now so that when we replace it with something which works. And that has been my goal. And just as I've listened to folks about mental health, I've listened to folks about what we can do about health care. And I actually think we have a pretty good plan. Lindsey Graham and I are working on it. Dean Heller is also going to be a co-sponsor. And I speak with my staff or I speak with the White House or our Department of Health and Hospitals several times a week, with fellow senators several times a week, with governors and Medicaid directors several times a week, trying to come to a point where we can have something ready to be voted on by the end of September. Now, if it seems like an ambitious agenda, it is, but I think it'll be the only way that we're able to succeed. And why is it important? Because right now, if you're in the individual market and you're not getting a subsidy, you're hurting. Moon Griffon is a talk show host, conservative flavor, comes out of Lafayette. Moon publicly speaks about his daughter having a special need. And so he has to have insurance. He has to have insurance. His premium this year, annual premium, is $44,000 with a $5,000 deductible and an additional deductible for his pharmaceutical. Now, if you need to give Moon any more reason to be concerned about the Affordable Care Act, he does not need it. $44,000. That is the mortgage on a, what, $400,000 home? A $500,000 home that he's putting up every year? We can do something better than that. And our proposal attempts to do so. Now, although we were planning as Republicans, by the way, Abe Lincoln, I saw that, good Republican, I kind of like that, you know, so, we're all Republicans today, maybe not. Don't know what the president's latest tweet is, maybe none of us are. That said, just a joke, Mr. President. That said, healthcare is not a Republican issue, it's not a Democratic issue. When someone is sick, you don't check what's your registration, nor does the patient ask the doctor what her registration is. It is an American issue. So we're trying to craft that policy that folks will vote for whether they are a Democrat or Republican. It's something that will cross the aisle. And folks say, what about the politics? I say good policy trumps politics. No pun intended. If we get the policy right, so it works for a state represented by Democratic senators, it is my ambition and my hope that they would transcend the pressure from their leadership and vote for the policy. And that is our goal. Lastly, just to mention some things that we'll be working on and are working on right now. I mentioned tax reform, National Flood Insurance Program. My gosh, there's no state that cares more about National Flood Insurance Program unless it's New York after Superstorm Sandy. I am collaborating with Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator from New York. We've come up with a pretty good policy. And again, if you read it, you would say, I like that. And some of you would read it and say, I recognize that idea. And you would recognize it because once again, we went around speaking to stakeholders, what works? What failed? How can we make it better? And when you listen to what people are saying and you try and translate it into public policy, turns out the American people have lots of wisdom. So we think our National Flood Insurance Bill, which has kind of been cut and pasted by others, so I think the core of what we have will eventually make it through in some way, has reforms. And our reforms are to make the program more affordable, more sustainable, with greater accountability for the federal taxpayer, with a longer reauthorization. Instead of every 6 months, 3 months, or 3 years, to make it a 10-year reauthorization. We don't know if we'll be completely successful in everything we're doing, but when I spoke to the chair of the banking committee, he said, Bill, I think your bill is the sweet spot. We still have folks here and there that we have to bring there, but we do think it's the sweet spot. And so I'm hopeful that a significant portion of it will come into law, if not all. Lastly, is there anything particular I'd like to say about tax reform? The president's goal is to decrease the corporate rate. Some of you are corporate, or formerly corporate. Some of you are pass-throughs, LLCs and S-corps, and some of you are accountants. He said during the campaign he would like to decrease that corporate rate to 15% and the pass-through rate to 20%. Now the current corporate rate is 35%. To get it down to 15 is about $100 billion per percentage point. So to get it to 15, you'd have to get $2 trillion in savings from someplace else. That may be difficult. So it may be that we will have to accept for something a little bit more modest, but still addressing things such as the repatriation of profits, the kind of incentive for people to look for tax shelters or loopholes as opposed to plowing their money back into job development, a flatter, if you will, lower, broader base of income. If we do that, that will be kind of the crowning achievement of what the president started out as a blue-collar campaign, taking care of those working families, trying to find something, either in infrastructure regulatory reform, healthcare, or tax code revision that will make that family, who's not done well over the last 8 years, to be able to say that our future is brighter. If we can do that, despite the party, we will all have done our job. And that's my goal. I think I have a few minutes for questions, but thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you having me.
You have any questions?
Hey, Chris.
Our microphone people will run to you so that everybody can hear your questions.
So y'all heard that bit about being in the Kmart, by the way. Shout out to Steve Winkler. He and his wife were there at the Kmart with us. And it was just an incredible experience. So Steve, just to see you there, was kind of remind you of that. But anyway, Chris.
Senator, you and I worked on NIH and other funding in the health sciences, and that's been kind of under siege in the president's budget. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah. So again, when you are in an office like this, you bring your entire life experience to this office. And each of us in this room is at risk for Alzheimer's disease, dementia, mental illness, suicide. And the NIH has not been spending the preponderance of its money looking at mental illness, suicide, or dementia, Alzheimer's, or other neurodegenerative diseases, think ALS. So what I've attempted to do is to start getting the NIH to focus down on those which are our national priorities. They were told 20 years ago that they had lost focus on national priorities. So we've been somewhat successful. We also have pushed to increase the funding. If we were to look at the future liabilities for our society on just Alzheimer's and dementia, I think it's like $1 trillion over 10 years. I think that's easily. That's just Medicare and Medicaid, not what people get from private insurance or from. The only way we're going to get out of that is if we find a therapy which hopefully will either ameliorate, postpone, or completely eliminate the risk for Alzheimer's and dementia. Most of us in this room have personal experience with that, in the sense of a family member. So, Chris, to answer your question, one, we've been increasing the budget. We have for the last 2 years. The president's budget attempts to cut, but we're fairly sure we'll protect and even raise more. My goal is to do it for the NIH, not just to raise their money, but to have it be more focused. I'm also interested in increasing funding for the National Science Foundation. Our country's economy works best when we have scientific innovation, which other countries don't have. We capitalize upon creating those jobs for those families. And we can see evidence of that all over the place. And so that's, again, my kind of perspective, both as a physician and as kind of, if you will, an applied scientist. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Hey, George.
I know you're well aware of the challenges Louisiana faces with regard to uninsured and the impact that Medicaid expansion has had on the state. What's your diagnosis for Medicaid, future Medicaid expansion coverage?
Yeah, so when the president ran for office, he said he wished to continue coverage. He did not want folks to lose coverage. Obviously, the Medicaid expansion has become an important part of expanding coverage. But you have to have a system which is sustainable. And right now, Obamacare is not sustainable. If you look at the amount of money being spent, it's almost without rhyme or reason. So let me first speak not about our state, but about another state. If you look at Massachusetts, these numbers won't be quite right, but they'll be conceptually right. Pennsylvania and Massachusetts both expanded Medicaid. Pennsylvania has twice the population of Massachusetts, but Massachusetts pulls down 2 times as much money from the Obamacare expenditures. Think about that. Half the population, 2 times the money. There was no accountability as to how those federal dollars were to be spent. Now, when I say federal dollars, that's you and me. We're the federal taxpayer. It is our federal dollars. And the more money that goes there, the less money there is for NIH, Army Corps of Engineers, drug treatment programs. So we have to come up with a way which is sustainable. What we've been speaking, and next thing, what I also found as a physician, let me check my time, as a physician, is if the patient has the power, then she wins. I compare Earl K. Long Hospital with Women's Hospital, the old Women's on Airline and Goodwin. They were both built in 1965. At the end, Earl K. Long Hospital was imploded, and it should have been imploded 10 years earlier. The facility was awful. Women's Hospital only moved because they had become so busy they needed a bigger location. At Earl K. Long, where I worked, dedicated doctors and nurses doing good work. You would come in, there's a doctor who worked with me from Uganda. He said it looked like a hospital in Africa, with potholes in the road, broken doors that were not fixed, small quarters, long lines. The patient had no place else to go, so there was no incentive to upgrade. Women's Hospital, if that woman didn't like her experience, she went to Baton Rouge General. And so you walked in, and there was a concierge to park your car. There was mauve and pink walls. There's $4 coffee to the right, I'm sure supplied by Community. There was a flower shop. There was somebody to tell you where to go. It was all a therapeutic experience from the moment you came in. So what we're trying to do, now under the Affordable Care Act, that power was taken to Washington, D.C. We would like to return that power to the state and to the patient so that the patient gets the funding to decide the policies that she wants that works best for her family, continuing the coverage, broadening the risk pool, lowering the cost of premiums for, say, a Moon Griffon, but at the same time making the system more sustainable. One more thing about Medicaid expansion. In 2020, states will be responsible for 10% of whatever they've been drawing down from the federal government. Louisiana enrolled 450,000 people, and in the Medicaid expansion population, we're paying top dollar. The 10% that we as taxpayers will owe in 2020 is $310 million per year, every year thereafter, assuming no other growth in the program. The legislature is struggling right now. Are we going to come up with $310 million more every year? It's going to be hard. So I will also say unabashedly, I'm wearing my Louisiana hat, trying to find a way to make it easier on our state to both continue that coverage, to give flexibility, to lower cost, but also to help that state legislature with that bill which is coming due. I am out of time now. We are through at 1 o'clock on time. I appreciate very much for your attention. If ever I can serve you, please give me the opportunity.